So I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. I actually think that New Hampshire is the West Virginia of New England. It totally is. I grew up with my parents and my sister. My dad was actually raised by a mostly single mother, lived in poverty his whole life, went to high school where he met my mother, and thankfully graduated high school, got a good paying blue-collar job outside of his graduation, married my mom, and has had a job for 40 years that he's hated every single day, and he'll thankfully be retiring here next month. I think I'm going to surprise him by flying in for his retirement party that he says he doesn't want to have, that he is having. And when I look back at the times I spent with my dad, especially in high school and middle school, he was always kind of my champion, pushing me to always be the best and to do the best. If you want to know a little bit about me and the way I operate, one of my earliest memories of school was when I was in the first grade, and he made me go get extra credit and go to school early for getting a B on my math test. So he was a pretty tense person. And he always talked about me going to college, getting that degree, having choices in my life. So I didn't have to work in a job like him that he hated, that I would be able to choose the life that I wanted to live. And he talked a lot about hard work and what it takes and how you always have to strive to be the best. And when I think about why I am the way I am and why I push my team of 40 folks at Students for Life to work so hard and to be so active, they can all blame my father. Going to college for my dad and getting a full ride was not a hope for him. It was an understanding. And yeah, that's pretty much my life. But I also knew that I wanted to go to college and I wanted to have a career. And at the time, especially in high school, I wanted to go into aeronautical engineering. I won a scholarship to Space Academy down in Huntsville, Alabama. I was a big dork. I still have my space suit that I brought out on occasion. Can't fit into it, but it's pretty cool to hang up. But I also knew that I wanted to get married. I knew I wanted to be a mom. I thought maybe 1 or 2 children. I've ended up with 4. My parents never did have that talk with me about where those babies come from, so apparently I just keep expecting more to come out. But I had this great role model in my mom. My mom, who was always hustling from her job as a school teacher to home, to make dinner, to make sure we got to wherever we needed to be, to church where we were very active in our evangelical community there, back home. She was the person who was up at 5 in the morning, making sure lunches were made, dinner was in the crock pot, my uniform for basketball or volleyball was being washed, and she was always the last one to go to sleep at night as well. And I think if you would have asked me in high school and in college, are you a feminist? I would have replied with an enthusiastic hell yes. Because of course I was a feminist. I was better than all the other boys in my class. I had a higher GPA. I got the full ride scholarship. I knew I was equal to men, that I wasn't below men, or I wasn't unequal to the men that surrounded me. But I think that today at 32, yes, I've just aged myself, I'm pretty sure, even though my life that I live today embodies a lot of what the first wave and the second wave of feminists envisioned for women in America, to be able to run a company, to be able to work outside of the home, to be able to have a family. Even though my life, I think, has fulfilled a lot of those dreams, those hopes of those first and second wave feminists, I would think if you would ask mainstream feminists, is Kristan a feminist, they would probably say no. Absolutely not. There's no way she can be a feminist. You see, when someone asks me about feminism, I think about those early tenets of feminism. Those feminist foremothers who fought for equality for all human beings, who fought for the rights of all human beings, no matter where they came from, that we're equal, that fought against injustice, who said that human beings should never be property of other human beings. So when I think of feminism, when I think about, am I a feminist, and the times I've labeled myself a feminist publicly, that's what I think about, is do I believe in equality? But I would say I'm not welcome in the mainstream feminist movement today because of one simple issue, and that issue is the violence of abortion. Proof of that can be found in the fact that the Women's March that happened in D.C. this January, just a couple days after President Trump was elected, women online started organizing this big march. And I actually contacted Bob Bland, one of the co-founders of the Women's March, reached out to her on Facebook and said, hey, Students for Life would love to co-sponsor this because we serve majority women. Majority of our groups are led by women. We represent the majority of women who, in poll after poll after poll, say that abortion is morally wrong. We would love to be a part of this. And those requests went unanswered. Some of my friends' organizations who don't have the word for life in them, one organization, notably New Wave Feminists, they applied for co-sponsorship and they were omitted. Until an article came out in The Atlantic that quoted me, quoted some of these other pro-life feminists, saying, hey, we were going to participate in the Women's March. Then suddenly, all of these pro-life feminist groups were disqualified, were removed from the Women's March website, and a platform was released a week before the march supporting abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. And when you were there at the Women's March, and I don't know how many of you see a pussy at here, if you were at the Women's March, Planned Parenthood was front and center. They were the platinum sponsor. But we were there. We went to the Women's March anyway. We were there with our 20-foot banner, Abortion Betrays Women. We actually walked in front of the Women's March for several blocks, and we had obviously all female students with us. Although we did have 2 men, we had them carry the poles. We were pro-men for a lot of the carrying. We marched in front of that Women's March, and a lot of people thought like we were, part of the Women's March, that we were welcome there. And then they read our banner, Abortion Betrays Women, and then instantly things turned violent. Things turned very scary for the 15 and 16-year-old girls that were with us. But we were there. We were there for the women who've been lied to by mainstream feminism, who would say that abortion is necessary for our equality, to be equal in our society. We were there for the young girls in our generation who have been told since the 1994 Casey v. Planned Parenthood decision that said that, well, women need abortion in order to compete with men in the workplace. We were there for the women who saw our Abortion Betrays banner and were holding their anti-Trump sign of whatever message, looked up at our banner, nodded, and put their head back down. Who knew the reality of abortion, who'd been betrayed by these lies. We were there last Saturday, actually, in Detroit, when the Women's March had their first convention, and we stood outside the convention. Pro-life women weren't invited to this convention. There weren't pro-life feminist speakers. Inside, when I went in and went and spoke to people there, it was Planned Parenthood everywhere. The fact was it's already been bought off by the abortion industry. Men and women, I'm here today because I reject those lies. I reject the lies of mainstream feminism. I reject that lie that abortion is needed to ensure my equality, that abortion is needed in order for me to be free, that I must pay somebody to commit a violent act against another human being, a distinct, whole, living human being that has separate DNA from myself, that I must pay somebody to rip that person piece by piece in order to be free. Abortion has no place in our civil society today. It's violence. Today, when we were going through the Berkshires, we had the opportunity to actually stop at the birthplace of Susan B. Anthony in Adams, Massachusetts. It was only about an hour out of the way. Gunnar and I were kind of regretting it with the car sickness in the back. But we went there, and we were able to tour Susan B.'s birthplace. And I couldn't help but think about these waves of feminism and the first wave of feminism in our country. Most of them came from the slavery abolition movement. Many of them actually were upset that the abolitionists, who were led by mostly men, wouldn't accept female leaders in the abolition movement. Thinking about what they said about abortion, thinking about how they viewed abortion. And I've got quotes, and you can Google these. You don't have to trust me because I'm just an anti-abortion activist. But Mary Wollstonecraft, the early British feminist who wrote The Vindication of Rights of Women, that was the 1792 book that basically set off modern feminist thought. And she was not by any means a prude she lived a very interesting personal life. You can also Google that. Mary Wollstonecraft said, "Women becoming consequently weaker in mind and body than they ought to be were one of the grand ends of their being taken into account, that of bearing and nursing children had not sufficient strength to discharge the first duty of mother, and sacrificing to lavishness the parental affection that ennobles instinct, either destroy the embryo in the womb or cast it off when born. Nature in everything demands respect, and those who violate her laws seldom do so without impunity." Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a leader in the slavery abolitionist movement, who partnered with Susan B. Anthony, who was the editor of The Revolution. She wrote about infanticide, saying, "There must be a remedy for such a crying evil as this, but where shall it be found, at least to begin, if not in the complete enfranchisement and the elevation of women?" Sarah Norton, she's best known for being the first female to win acceptance in Cornell. She wrote, there was a case actually about a husband who actually gave his partner poison so she would have an abortion. She wrote, "Here we find that a husband has been procuring poison for his wife and prospective offspring, not with any wish to kill the wife perhaps, but as the chances are 5 to 1 against every woman who attempts abortion, he could not fail to realize the danger. Had the scheme been successful in destroying only the life aimed at, what could have been this man's crime, and what should be his punishment, if as accessory to one murder he commits 2. Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president in the United States. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female physician. She wrote about Madame Restell, the famous female abortionist in New York City. She wrote, "This gross perversion, destruction of motherhood by the abortionists filled me with indignation and awakened active antagonism." I need water, Matt, by the way. That the honorable term female physician should be exclusively applied to those women who carried on this shocking trade seemed to me a horror. It was utter degradation of what might and should become a noble position for women. Dr. Charlotte Lozier, Susan B. Anthony herself. The Revolution, during the time period of the printing of the Revolution, it was often known for women's magazines to have, advertisements for herbal supplements, for how to terminate a pregnancy, how to end a pregnancy. These were lucrative advertisements. The Revolution, the entire time of its printing, always refused to print these ads. She's on record multiple times talking about abortion, talking about how it's a crime against women and children. Alice Paul, the original author of the ERA. If you've watched Iron-Jawed Angels, my husband used to teach history before he became a stay-at-home dad, and that was his major video during that time. Alice Paul said, "Abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women." She predicted dead on what was going to happen in that second wave of feminism in the 60s. Because 40 years after the 19th Amendment, 40 years after women won our right to vote, second wave of feminism was kicked off. World War II was over. The 1963 Equal Pay Act made it illegal to pay men and women differently for the same exact jobs, for the same work. The Civil Rights Act in 1964 actually included provisions within it prohibiting sex discrimination and hiring and promotions. Betty Friedan's Feminist Mystique, which in the first edition never mentioned abortion and contraception. Her book was a rallying cry for the unhappiness and the restlessness that housewives were feeling across America. See, that second wave of feminism that kicked off, which had, I believe, very noble aims, I believe that was corrupted. It was corrupted by 2 men. Larry Ladder, a journalist who became the biographer of Margaret Sanger, the eugenicist who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion vendor, and Bernard Nathanson, an abortionist in New York State. Larry Ladder and Bernard Nathanson actually founded NARAL Pro-Choice America. At the time, it was called the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws. Bernard Nathanson, in his multiple books that he wrote, talked about how they decided that they had to take this issue of abortion and remove it from the upper white middle class men. Because it always had been this issue, it was a eugenics issue. That we don't want certain people to reproduce, certain IQ levels, certain disabilities. We don't want certain people to reproduce. And so what they had to do is they had to move it to this up-and-coming women's rights issue. Bernard Nathanson talked about that openly for years, about a lot of the stats they fabricated and they lied about. A great book to read. It's called Subverted. It was written by Sue Ellen Browder. You can find it on Amazon. Sue Ellen was a writer at Cosmopolitan at the time. She talked about the founding of NOW, the National Organization for Women, and that 1968 NOW conference where they actually adopted abortion into their platform because it wasn't there to begin with. That is where I believe feminism went wrong in our country. That's where I believe feminism was corrupted. And honestly, I have a hard time understanding where mainstream feminism today goes in America. The abortion industry will lead you to believe that we have so much to do, there's so much under attack, and it's always about contraception, it's always about abortion. We don't talk about, I believe if we want to have a viable feminist movement in our country, I think we need to talk about women's rights abroad. Because the fact is, ladies, we have equality under the law. Now, there's more things that have to happen. There's more enforcement that has to be done of our laws, better enforcement, but we actually do have equality. We don't need the ERA to tell us we're equal. But if we're actually serious about feminism, we should be fighting overseas. Because the fact is, I can walk in front of men. I don't have to walk behind my husband. I don't have to walk beside my brother. I can walk in front of them. I can drive a car. I don't have to worry about female genital mutilation. I don't have to worry about my daughter being sold to a husband age 12. And I think what you'll see, and if you read the multiple emails that you all are getting from Planned Parenthood and NARAL every day, you're going to see, oh, we're under attack. Women are under attack. Stand up, fight back, right? That's been screamed at me for like multiple hours in a row at the Supreme Court for years. Because what they've done is they've radicalized and institutionalized this belief that we have to have abortion, we have to have free hormonal contraception given to us by the U.S. taxpayers in order to be equal. And you see this everywhere. My friend Allie, who had an abortion, she was told by the worker at Planned Parenthood, oh, it's just 10 minutes. It'll be done. You can go back to school. It's not going to affect you at all. You won't regret this. Not a big deal. For Allie, it was a big freaking deal. She's still not recovered from her abortion. For our friend Eleanor, who I actually met about 6 years ago, Eleanor, who became pregnant at a Catholic college, Fordham, had this housing scholarship at Fordham, who was told, well, now that you're pregnant, you can no longer live on campus. So you can have an abortion and stay on campus, or you can keep your baby, but you lose your $10,000 housing scholarship. This has been institutionalized. We had a case just this spring where a student gave birth during her finals in December and came back to her community college in Denver and then was told, well, you can't apply for financial aid because you missed finals. There's nothing we can do for you. This is institutionalized. Just get it taken care of. Just have the abortion. I think we've been sold a lot of lies from mainstream feminism. I think the first lie that we've been sold is that sex is without consequence. The CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control, has proclaimed that we are in the midst of a STD epidemic, where 1 in 2 under 25 will obtain at least one STD. 1 in 2. Despite condoms being everywhere, being free, despite condoms in our high schools or middle schools, everywhere, we are in a freaking STD epidemic. Our Students for Life group at Baldwin Wallace College 2 weeks ago was told, oh, you can't have a booth at the LGBTQ sex fair And we said, well, why not? And they said, well, your message isn't sex positive enough. You don't have a positive message about sex. I'm sorry. I think we need to talk about the consequences of sex. And I actually don't think that's a bad thing, because every decision we make does have consequences. It does have consequences. We've been told that sex means nothing, that it can mean anything you want it to mean. That's wrong. We know that's wrong. We know what happens when we choose to have sex and we think it's nothing. It does mean something. It complicates our relationships. There are consequences to sex. Some of them are inconvenient ones, like a rash. Others are deadly, like HPV and HIV. Others have 18-year-plus commitments that go along with them. I believe once sex was trivialized, when sex was taken out of something that happened in a committed relationship between two people who are intending to build a life together, intending to build a family, a legacy together, the second lie of feminism had to take shape. And that was that contraception is necessary for the advancement of women in our country. That my fertility is not a gift. That it's just something that merely has to be suppressed. That I have to take dangerous hormonal drugs, and I'm talking about hormonal contraception, which alters how my body is supposed to perform so I can be equal. We know women and men are biologically different. You can start like at the very top. You can look at our brain function. We know women's brains are more connected with neurons to the right and left hemisphere, right? That's why drugs for mental disorders, they perform differently based on whether or not you are biologically a female or a male, because our brains are literally different. I don't understand why the fact that I'm female, the fact that I can conceive children and birth children is something that is not celebrated, is something that has to be hidden. We actually know first-wave feminists actually opposed contraception because they actually believed contraception would lead to the promiscuity of husbands and men. It's exactly what we have today. We have a generation of men who says, oh, you can have sex for whatever reason, and when you become pregnant, here, I'll give you the $350 to get it taken care of. Because there was no understanding of what would happen if she became pregnant. We have a generation of men who are addicted to pornography, and this isn't even a controversial fact. It's one of the many I'll say today. We have left and right, political left and right in our society who are actually fighting against the pornography addiction that plagues young men and young women. Today we also know that hormonal contraception, when I say hormonal contraception, I'm talking about the pill, an IUD, Depo-Provera. We know that not only can it act and perform as an abortifacient, meaning that when that unique, whole, living human being is created, he or she cannot implant into the mother's uterus, and that's an early abortion. I'll go through the science for you. But we also know that not only can it act as an abortifacient, it's actually potentially very dangerous for our bodies. We could look no further than the World Health Organization, who labeled hormonal contraception as a group 1 carcinogen. That's the same classification it's given cigarettes and asbestos. Yet we tell women in our country that you have to have this to be free. We also know that it can lead to increased risk of breast cancer. The Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, funded by the National Cancer Institute in the UK, found that women who use birth control pills could face a minimum of 50% increased risk of breast cancer. Birth control pills containing high-dose estrogen, 50 micrograms or more, boosted breast cancer risk nearly threefold. And those that contain moderate dose estrogen, which are a majority of our birth control pills in the market, 30 to 35 micrograms, increased their chances 1.6 times, the researchers found. And they went on actually to go through every popular brand of birth control, telling you the increased risk for breast cancer there. And this is like not a pro-life group, obviously. We also know that birth control doesn't actually reduce abortions. So this summer, there's a fascinating study came out from BPAS, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. They are the leading abortion vendor in the UK. So obviously, once again, not a pro-life source here. In the Huffington Post, they wrote, it turns out that over half of women, 51%, who procured abortions, did so because of the failure of their contraceptive method. In fact, the study over 60,000 women found that contraceptive use contributed to a greater likelihood that women would have later-term abortions 20 weeks or later when children are scientifically proven to feel pain, because they assume that they can't get pregnant using contraception and miss early pregnancy signs as a result. In response to the study, the BPAS chief executive said, quote, our data shows women cannot control their fertility through contraception alone, even when they are using some of the most effective methods. Family planning is contraception and abortion. Abortion is birth control that women need when the regular method lets them down. Now, what I just said is extremely controversial. In fact, if anything I'll say today is probably things that makes you Google me more. And do what I just said, because the fact is in our country we can't even have a conversation about birth control. We can't talk about it without people losing their shit. Because it becomes a highly emotional situation, because most of us have been on birth control in our life. Most of us have been prescribed birth control for a medical condition. But it's something we have to talk about. But we can't talk about because it's gospel truth. And raising any doubt as to why we should be pumping women full of carcinogenic drugs means that you're anti-feminist, that you're anti-women. I don't eat meat that had, my cows that I eat, I don't eat meat that had hormones, that were injected with hormones. I drink organic milk. Well, I did drink organic milk until I went paleo a couple months. Why would I put those hormones in my body? Don't worry, I cursed. He's used to it. I know people are like, oh, our son's right there. So, sex is without consequence, lie one. Then you need birth control because the sex that you're having is not within a relationship where you're hoping to stay together and build a family. So you have to have birth control to prevent a natural consequence of sex. And you have to control your fertility because that apparently is not a gift. When ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare passed, the Department of Health and Human Services actually labeled pregnancy a preventable disease. That's how they forced health insurance plans to cover birth control at 100%, because they say, oh, it's a preventable disease. I reject the fact that my fertility is a preventable disease. My 4 children, were not preventable diseases. So now we go on to the third and fourth lies in mainstream feminism, and that is that, once again, abortion is needed for us to be free, and it's harmless. It's without consequence. And we don't have to start with, does abortion kill a human being? I mean, I feel like that's like settled science. 1995, feminist Naomi Wolf wrote in New Republic, the statement that abortion stops at being heart is incontrovertibly true. Pro-abortion feminist Camille Paglia wrote in Salon, I have always frankly admitted that abortion is murder, the extermination of the powerless by the powerful. In Conscious, a Catholic magazine, former Catholics for Choice president Francis Kiesling declared, yes, the fetus does have value. The argument today, and the conversation I usually have on college and high school campuses with people, is not whether it's a human being, whether abortion ends a life, unique, whole, living human being. It's whether or not women's freedom and well-being demands access to abortion. That women should have the choice to kill somebody weaker than them. And rather than seeking to truly serve those in crisis, those facing an unplanned pregnancy in their life, we just simply tell her, oh, just Google it. Planned Parenthood's there. Most campuses, 79% of Planned Parenthoods are 5 miles from a college campus. When she seeks that advice from her boyfriend, her family, her friends, she hears that mantra, oh, it's your body, it's your choice, do whatever you want. And the subtext that she reads into that is, just get this over with. Just have that abortion. In fact, when I was writing my first book, I interviewed students that I had met, and half of them had chosen life, had had an unexpected pregnancy, chose life. Some of them chose the parent, some of them chose to place with an adoptive family. The other half have had abortions. And the one thing that we found in all the interviews we conducted was that the women who had somebody in their life to say, hey, you don't have to do this, there's somebody who will help you, they chose life. It was the women who didn't hear that, who actually had sought for it, who all they heard was, it's your body, your choice, whatever. All they took from that was, you have to have the abortion. That they had no support. And honestly, if you've ever gone out, I've gone out in front of abortion facilities for a number of years to pray, and I don't really like being out there, but when you're there and you see women walking into the abortion facility at 6 or 7 in the morning, they're wearing sweatpants, they're looking down, no one's ever like expressive and excited to be exercising their reproductive rights. No one's on their phone, but like, oh, I'll be there later, I just have to go in, stop for this quick abortion. It's a sad thing. Women will, if I talk to women outside the abortion facility, she'll say, yeah, it's either me or my baby. She refers to what's inside of her as a baby. She doesn't have to use the politically correct mantra of it's a fetus, it's just a zygote, it's just an embryo. She refers to what's inside of her as a baby. She's there not because she's exercising a choice. She's there because she feels like she literally has no choices. That's what's driven her to that abortion facility. First wave feminist Maddie Brinkerhoff wrote, when a man steals to satisfy hunger, we may safely conclude that there is something wrong in society. So when a woman destroys the life of her unborn child, it is evidence that either by education or circumstances, she has been greatly wrong. Men and women, what I would say is that we've become a lazy country. It is through our own laziness that we have abortion in America today. Because we don't have to deal with it. We don't have to engage. We don't have to seek true social justice, to truly build a relationship with her, to say, how can it be possible? How can you remain a student here at Dartmouth and stay pregnant? How can you achieve that career you've always wanted and also be a mom? We just say, go Google it. Go to Planned Parenthood. And I don't even have to mention the consequences. I mean, gosh, I do have to mention. I have to mention the consequences of abortion. Now, we don't have good abortion statistics here in America. In fact, in New Hampshire, there's going to be a commission coming out tomorrow recommending whether or not New Hampshire passes a law requiring New Hampshire to actually report on abortion. There's 3 states that don't report abortion to CDC. California is the largest. They perform 1 in every 6 abortions. So the data that you actually receive from the CDC is always skewed because there's actually no national reporting of abortion mandated. States can decide to do whatever the hell they want. So when you're looking at data about abortion, you have to look overseas. You have to look in nations where abortion is really not that controversial. In Finland, the researchers identify a strong statistical association between abortion and suicide in a records-based study. They found that the mean annual suicide rate for all women was 11.3 per 100,000. But the rate for women following an abortion, by contrast, was 3.47. 3 times higher. The suicide rate associated with birth was half the rate of all women and less than 1/6 the rate of suicide amongst women who had abortions. Over 20 studies have linked abortion to increased rates of drug and alcohol abuse. The lowest incidence rate of PTSD reported following abortion is 1.5%, which would translate to over 600,000 cases. Another study found that 14% of American women have all the symptoms of PTSD and attribute them to their abortions, with as many as 65% of those women reporting some but not all symptoms of PTSD. An analysis of 15 years of published research in the British Journal of Psychiatry found that women who had undergone an abortion experienced an 81% increased risk of mental health problems. I'm not reading from pro-life sources. In 2003, a landmark article in Obstetrical and the Gynecological Survey compiled its results of several studies on abortion. They show that induced abortion increases the risk of placenta previa and later pregnancy by 50% and doubles the risk of preterm birth. placenta previa is deadly. My sister actually almost died of it last year, giving birth to my nephew. It's when the placenta impacts at the bottom of the woman's uterus and covers the cervix. And so when she goes into labor, the placenta can detach and there's internal bleeding, and the child and the mother can be lost. Preterm births accounted for 12.1% of all births in 2002 in the United States. That was up from 8.9 in 1980. And this is an increase despite there being a nationwide effort to reduce preterm birth, because we know how risky preterm birth is for children. 38 times more likely to have cerebral palsy. Developmental delays. When a woman delays her first full-term pregnancy through abortion, researchers found that she increases her risk of developing breast cancer. This is because the first full-time pregnancy, especially before the age of 32, acts as a protective mechanism against breast cancer. A landmark study in 2014 in the Cancer Causes Control Medical Journal concluded that just one abortion, just one, increased the risk of breast cancer by 44%. For women who had 2 abortions, the risk rose to 76%, and then almost doubled after 3 or more abortions. This Chinese study, the third study actually that happened in the 3-month period that showed a positive link between abortion and breast cancer, was a meta-analysis of 36 studies covering 14 provinces in China, all of which compared the risk of breast cancer among women who had induced abortions and those who did not. A 2014 Bangladesh study suggested that abortion raised the risk of breast cancer up by 20%. Like I said, these are not anti-abortion statistics. These are from other countries, other nations, where abortion is accepted, where the government actually has an interest in understanding the actual effects of abortion. And let me be very clear, we don't need abortion vendors like Planned Parenthood. There are thousands of federally qualified health centers. We called them FQHCs at HHS when I worked there. FQHCs outnumber Planned Parenthood facilities 20 to 1 in our country. FQHCs serve more than 21 million men, women, and children every single year. Planned Parenthood, in their last year report, boasted about 1.9. FQHCs, Planned Parenthood receives 3 times more money, though, than FQHCs in taxpayer funds. And their services that the Planned Parenthood provides actually cost more than FQHCs. Planned Parenthood per patient services is $185. Per patient at FQHCs, the services are $146. Statisticians have found that if every single Planned Parenthood was shut down tomorrow, every federally qualified health center would only have to see 2 more patients every week to make up the difference. That's crazy. Federally qualified health centers actually provide comprehensive health care. They actually provide care if you are pregnant. They actually provide well women care. They provide well child care. They have to provide dental care. And if you go to a federally qualified health center that doesn't offer the service you need, like, I don't know, a mammogram, they have to legally transport you to a center that does. FQHCs do not have a C4. They don't have multiple packs. Planned Parenthood's President Cecile Richards last year in Rolling Stone last September bragged about the fact that Planned Parenthood is putting more than $30 million into the election of Hillary Clinton. They are one of DC's top lobbying organizations. FQHCs aren't lobbying organizations. You can pull up Planned Parenthood's own reports. Once again, you don't have to believe what I'm saying. Pull up Planned Parenthood's own annual reports, and you will see that as their government funding has increased for the past 10 years, their good services, those non-abortion services, have actually decreased. You can pull up their annual reports. From 2006 to 2015, the number of clients served by Planned Parenthood dropped by 19%, but their revenue rose by 30%. Their cancer screenings, prenatal services were cut in half, but their abortions skyrocketed. They committed 289,000 abortions in 2006. Last year, they committed 328,000. Abortion is down nationally by 12%, yet it's only down 1.6% for Planned Parenthood. 2006, Planned Parenthood committed 1 out of every 5 abortions. Today, Planned Parenthood commits 1 out of every 3. As our federal funding has increased, their share of the abortion industry has increased. We know from former Planned Parenthood directors who tell us about Planned Parenthood's abortion quotas. We've seen the images snapped from inside Planned Parenthoods of Planned Parenthoods being awarded certificates when they meet their abortion quotas every month. If they simply offer abortion as a way to help women, why the hell do they have a sales quota? They're actually selling a product. They have goals that they actually have to meet every month as to how many abortions they commit. Once again, you don't have to believe me. Look at what happened this spring when President Trump and Ivanka Trump said, well, we'd really like to continue funding Planned Parenthood as long as they stop committing abortions. Ivanka Trump met with Cecile Richards and suggested maybe you just separate your abortion services into another 501c3. That way we can still continue to provide funding for the good services you provide. Cecile Richards tweeted out, President of Planned Parenthood tweeted out, PP is proud to provide abortion, a necessary service that's as vital to our mission as birth control and cancer screenings. There you have it. Now, the last slide of feminism, mainstream feminism. And this is one that was, I think, the most difficult for me because I understood at 15 what abortion was. I knew it killed a unique human being. I knew it was a human rights violation. But the harder one for me was I always thought I could have it all. That I could have my career, I could run my business, and I could have my family, and that would be easy. Like, we never really talked about it. If you think about it, when you're in middle school and they take you away from the sex ed talk and they talk about you're a woman and things are changing and cool things that women can do, and when you talk about in college and when you talk about your future, and I mean, I'm a big fan. Like, I think we need real life skills being taught. Like, I don't know, it's been helpful to learn how to balance my checkbook, before I graduated college, how to invest in the stock market, things that at 32 I'm starting to holy cow, I need more money for retirement. But one of the things that we never talked about was this: how do you do it as a woman? How do you actually do it? And this slide took me a lot of time to actually come through it. When we started Students for Life, I lived 90 minutes away without traffic, so I had to leave by 5 in the morning to get to the office. I slept in my office 2 nights a week on a little IKEA mini couch, which we still have somewhere at Students for Life, their headquarters. But what I found was something always has to give. That we actually can't have it all. Something always has to give. And it's a constant struggle as women to balance the priorities that we have in our life. And often I get asked by young women who want to serve full-time in the pro-life world, the pro-life mission, to mentor them. And this is the number one question I get from them is, how do I do it all? And I say, the first thing you have to understand, it's a myth that you can have it all. Things will be going really great at work and something really crappy will happen in your family life. Things will be going really great in your family and something bad will happen at work, and it's always going to be like this. Because once again, every choice, every decision we make has consequences. Erica Koshmar just published a new book called Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. She just came out with this new book, and I was reading some of the highlights and the coverage of it this weekend at the Wall Street Journal. And it's fascinating how she's being attacked by other women in the media for simply saying, because she's a psychoanalyst, how being a mom and being there in your children's life those first 3 years matters. Because many of those women like me, who have chosen to work, have worked outside of the home. And it's hard to think about. Because every day I'm away from my children is a day I'm missing with them. Gunnar, who's here with me tonight, obviously we're homeschooling right now. And Gunnar and his sister have cystic fibrosis. I don't want to really talk about what cystic fibrosis is right now, but you can, once again, Google it. But one of the things I had to learn right away was, holy cow, every day I'm away from my son, every day I'm away from my daughter is a day that I will not get back. And those days are freaking numbered. And they're fleeting. Something I was told early on, what I always tell my mentees, is that you can try to have it all, but you're going to have to balance, and you have to know what your balls are. What are your crystal balls and what are your glass balls? As a working mom, how do you do it? because you're always going to be juggling. You have to know what your rubber balls are, what you can drop that will bounce back up, and what are your crystal balls that if you drop them will shatter. And it's a constant struggle, especially for me, because I overcommit myself. I say, oh, sure, I love to go here, and I realize, holy cow, I'm only going to be home for 12 hours this week. I realize, wow, I'm going to miss all this time with my family. Or if I don't take that work trip and I miss out on that grant, or I miss out on that opportunity, that media opportunity because I chose my family, I'm always constantly reevaluating those balls I'm juggling. I think for me, when we talk about this myth of feminism, this myth of you can have it all, I think one of the things that frustrates me is that we think about feminism as equality, and equality will bring us happiness. That having the career we wanted, having that job we wanted, or obtaining that level of education that we always worked so hard for, it's going to bring us happiness. I think it does bring you some happiness, but I think one of the things you've learned is your real freedom isn't found in your autonomy to do what you want to do, what serves yourself. Greek philosophers said freedom is the power to choose the good. Aristotle said rational beings seek their ultimate end, happiness, by using their reason to judge what will further that end or undermine it. Our real freedom is our ability to love and to give love and to receive love, to serve and be served. We are relational creatures. We desire relationships with other people. I believe your happiness comes from knowing who you are, what you were called to be, what you were called to do, and those relationships that you have, having those positive relationships in your life. Because we can have all the money and the careers we want. We can have the nice houses and the cars and the awesome clothes, designer clothes. But that doesn't bring us happiness, and we know this. We know this. So, am I angry about the lies of mainstream feminism? Yes. I'm angry about it. I think that we can't even have conversations in our country about these myths without, dissolving into arguments and screaming, shouting matches. So how do we move forward? What more do we do? I think that those of us who fight so hard to abolish abortion, to make abortion unthinkable and illegal in our nation, we're fighting for is real choice. We're fighting for nonviolent health care. We're fighting for nonviolent options. We don't think we need to be cured from some disease. We don't think our fertility is something that has to be suppressed or hidden. We understand that sending her off alone and scared to that abortionist saying it's your choice is wrong. There's no justice in it for her. The reasons that lead her to that abortion facility, whether it's that bad relationship she's in, that abusive relationship, whether it's the poverty she's currently experiencing, abortion has only prolonged and potentially compounded her struggle. Instead of seeking to build a real relationship with her, to say, where are you at? Where do you want to be? We just ship her off to someone else. I think it's the pro-life movement, the pro-life generation, that is advocating for the support of women and families in need. We don't believe in just shipping her off and handing off her problem to relieve her crisis. We want to help her build a life for herself, help her build a life for her family. At Students for Life, we have a program called Pregnant on Campus. It's quite simple. It's basically putting your money where your mouth is. Is how do we change our college campuses? How do we change this institutionalized belief to actually help women who are facing unplanned pregnancies, to help women and men who are parents? How do we do that? And I can't tell you how many times we've had events with Pregnant on Campus, and we've invited the other side there, and the other side, pro-abortion side, won't even show up for the discussion. And all we're talking about is putting diaper changing stations in the bathrooms, or having lactation rooms on campus, or making sure the campus has housing available to pregnant and parenting students, to make sure that there's daycare options available to her. So, like I said, I don't think mainstream feminists would call me a feminist, and I don't even know if I would call myself a feminist anymore, because I think that for me, what I'm more concerned about, what I care about is making sure that being pro-life is synonymous with being pro-woman. That America knows this is what being pro-life and anti-abortion is about. It's about caring for her. It's about caring for her child. It's about creating families that are whole and they're healthy and they thrive. I care about that pro-life label. So I'm going to show a quick video and then we can do some Q&A.
I'm Jocelyn. I had an abortion in Des Moines, Iowa in 2002. So that morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, we entered the Planned Parenthood. We were immediately asked for payment. The other people in the room were crying, they're upset. It's dark, dirty. All of the furniture is very old and outdated, and the seats were all in a U shape, so you had no choice but to see everyone else that was sitting there. There was a couple that sat in the corner crying to each other. There was another woman sitting by herself, looked like she had a very rough life. Then it was time for me to go back for my abortion. No one talks to you, no one comforts you, no one explains anything to you. There was no discussion of options. There was no discussion of community resources to help me if I wanted to parent. There was no suggestion of adoption. They did an ultrasound. I wondered why they were even doing an ultrasound, because I was under the impression that there was no baby there yet. I was very confused and did not fully understand the procedure. They said it would be mild cramping. That is the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. They say it only lasts about 10 minutes. It felt like an hour of hell. He didn't talk, he muttered to the other staff, and when he was done, he just left. My partner at the time was bawling. This is a grown man, bawling. Afterwards, we were led to a recovery room, which was just a small room with chairs, armchairs, and they said after a while they would check and make sure that our bleeding was okay, and then we could just leave. No aftercare, no follow-up. And it took a while, to realize what had happened. And I tried to convince myself for a long time that it was okay. You'll find that the abortion affects all sorts of areas of your life. It affects the way that you parent your other children. I had a very difficult time bonding with the daughter I already had after my abortion. I had a very difficult time bonding with the child I had after my abortion. I became pregnant right away. Drug use has been a struggle for many years. I don't feel comfortable or trust doctors. I don't feel comfortable even when it's probably needed. I certainly don't seek out dental care, specifically because the machines that are used in the dentist office, the suction, the sound of the machines puts me right back at that day. And I can't even go to have a cleaning done because it's that traumatic. There's absolutely no reason to go to a Planned Parenthood. There are so many community resources now that can help you get to a real doctor and receive prenatal care. There are resources to help you financially, spiritually, even if it's just finding a safe home if you're not in a place that's safe. My husband works really hard. He works 40 hours a week and we live paycheck to paycheck. To know that my husband's hard-earned money goes to fund an organization that has destroyed my life and the lives of thousands of women, in addition to destroying children in the womb, is repugnant, and it makes me sick. I am a one-issue voter. This has affected my entire life, not just my life, but other members of my family, other women in my family that have had abortions. This has affected our family so broadly, this can't be political anymore. These are people's lives. And I've been voting for pro-life politicians since I've been able to vote, and I need to see action. People are hurting. People's lives are being destroyed. It's time to defund Planned Parenthood.
What's interesting about Jocelyn's story is that we brought her to Capitol Hill, and I'd met her once, and we were at Speaker Boehner's office at the time, and we were trying to get the Republicans to actually do something. And I knew her, she had a black tooth, and obviously you don't point that out to somebody like, hey, what's wrong with her tooth? And she started talking about her experience at Planned Parenthood, what happened inside the Planned Parenthood to the speaker's staff. And she pointed at her mouth and she said, I don't know if you noticed, but I don't smile a lot. And I do that on purpose. And she lifted up her lip and she showed us her tooth. And she said, I've had multiple abscesses, but I can't go into that dentist office. So I would rather endure the pain of that tooth abscess. And I don't know if you've ever had one. I had it happen twice to me last year, and I wanted to give birth 4 times as opposed to having a tooth abscess ever again. And because she is so afraid of going into that abortion facility, into that dentist office, because it reminds her of that abortion facility, it was interesting because her abortion happened 12 years ago, but it's left this lasting emotional and now these physical scars upon her body. So we have a microphone that's going to be passed around. Raise your hand and they'll hold the microphone and I'll attempt to answer your question to the best of my ability.
Thank you for the talk. I'm just curious as to what your stance is on women who have been sexually assaulted and are seeking an abortion because they don't want to have a baby, that reminds them of a traumatic event in their life.
Yeah. No, I think the first thing we need to do is acknowledge the horror of rape and of sexual assault. That's not something you would wish upon anybody who's experienced that. And I think that's something that no matter how she moves on upon that rape or that sexual assault in her life, is something she'll always deal with. And it's something that's never going to go away. And we do know that in some cases of sexual assault that women do become pregnant. It's not as common as I think mainstream media would like you to think, but it does happen. And it's a difficult situation because she didn't engage in sex just to, for the fun of it. Motherhood was actually literally forced upon her. And I think there's many crimes that rapist has committed, or that person who has assaulted her has committed. And I think one of those crimes is forcing her into this position. I think there's 3 decisions that she can make. She can choose to parent her child. She can choose to place her child with an adoptive family, and I have many friends who were actually conceived in rape, who were placed with an adoptive family after their birth by their mother, by their birth mother. Or she can choose to pay someone to dismember her child. I still believe that child, through no fault of its own, deserves the right to live. That he or she did not choose his parents. I think when we talk about rape, it's like I said, this isn't something that's easy to, on TV in 15 seconds. How do you talk about this without sounding callous, without making it sound like you haven't thought about this? And it's something that every pro-life advocate, someone who advocates against abortion, has to think seriously about. I think one of the things I would say is when we're talking about abortion legislation in our country, if we're thinking about abortion and regulating abortion, restricting abortion, I would say you could even say, hey, okay, fine, we'll allow abortion in cases of rape. Planned Parenthood, NARAL, now, would you still support? Would you support our legislation? They'd say absolutely not. And so when we talk about rape often, and it gets brought up in the abortion debate, I don't think it actually gets brought up out of genuine interest. It gets brought up because it is the saddest thing to talk about. It is the most devastating thing that can happen to another human being, is that sexual assault. So I think we have to be genuine when we talk about this. One thing that we think about in the pro-life movement, because we believe that at the moment of conception, a unique, whole, living human being is formed, and that human being has and deserves the right to live. One way we explain our views on abortion is what happens if she is sexually assaulted, becomes pregnant, decides to parent her child, and then at the age of 2, her little boy or her little girl reminds her too much of that traumatic experience. Maybe her rapist had brown hair and her child has brown hair and has her rapist's eyes. Does she have the right to kill her child at that point? No, she doesn't. No one would say, yeah, she should kill a 2-year-old. The reason why is majority of people overwhelming majority of people, like 99% of people, would say she can't kill her child at point. And they would say, well, it's because it's a 2-year-old. And it becomes a question then of what is that unborn child? Does that unborn child's life matter? Is that unborn child equal to that 2-year-old child?
Thank you. To use the analogy you just came up with, if a 2-year-old child has some sort of disease or illness and needs an organ transplant, should the government mandate that the mother has to provide that organ? In other words, use her body to keep that child alive? And if not, then why should a mother by the government, be forced to use her body to keep, in your words, an unborn child alive?
Well, she doesn't actually have to keep the unborn child alive. She just doesn't have to actively pay someone to kill it. Because what's interesting is at the moment, no, that is what abortion is. At the moment of conception, the DNA is already there, right? A unique, whole, living human person has been created. Has DNA from mother, has DNA from father. And that human being will never exist again. That human being isn't a part of her body. That human being is another body, right? When I was pregnant with my son Gunnar, I had a unique, whole, living human being inside of me, correct? And you would agree with that. When we talk about abortion, and what's interesting is that zygote at the moment of conception, who then grows to embryo, who grows into fetus, who becomes newborn, who becomes toddler, who becomes adolescent, that human being is self-directed. The woman's body isn't giving cues to that baby of like, hey, grow some fingers today. Hey, how are the ovaries going? That human being is actually self-directed. All she has to do is not actively kill it. So the analogy you tried to paint is something very different. It's very different because you're not saying when that child is within her, she's not directing that child. That child is alive. That child is growing and will continue to grow unless she pays somebody to kill that child, unless she has a miscarriage.
The CDC, their statistic on abortion is that 91% of them happen within the first 13 weeks. Mm-hmm. And the way that's done is that you're given a dosage of prostaglandins, which are in your own body, and they're synthetically made in this case. But they're also found in all college students, as we're all in high-stress environments, are all often sick on campus, and miscarriage is something that occurs a lot. And in this case, the way that abortion is done from like day 0 to the first 20 weeks is basically an induced miscarriage. And so what is your stance on miscarriage, and how would you deal with a situation like that?
Okay. Miscarriage is something that happens, right? Whether there's a chromosomal defect with the child, whether there's something,
high cortisol levels, so
whether she's under high levels of stress. There's a lot of things that can result in a miscarriage. And that's actually one of the hardest things for women who've undergone a miscarriage of, what did I do something? And sometimes they say maybe, and sometimes they say maybe not. Miscarriage is fundamentally different from abortion because you're not...
It's biologically the same thing, though.
It's different because you've paid somebody to kill a human being. During a miscarriage, you're not saying, hey, body, I'm going to pay you $350 to suck my baby out of my body. Oh, when you're talking about RU46, it's the same thing. I don't care if it's a hormone that can be found wherever. You are paying someone to ingest something to end the life of a unique, whole, living human being inside of you. That is innately different from a natural process that happens with miscarriage. Other question?
Hi. So this is obviously your whole life, something you're very passionate about. So
obviously.
Yeah. Saving babies, as you have said. And you've alluded to this problem a bit, and the movie alluded to this a bit, how there's lack of resources, lack of support. Sure. So I'm wondering, how do you support mothers and children from low-income, poverty backgrounds who would not be able to feed and take care of their children once they're born?
Sure.
I haven't heard any post-birth help from you.
Sure. Well, that's what our Pregnant on Campus program actually does, because it's pregnant women and parenting parent students, so men and women. And actually, a lot of our Students for Life groups have scholarship programs that award scholarships to both pregnant women and parenting students to help them remain in school. We know statistically that a child born into poverty is 7 times more likely to live in poverty his or her whole life. So my argument would be the best thing that we can do for her, the best thing we can do for her child, for her family, is to make sure she does graduate. She does get that degree. She does go and achieve that career that she's always envisioned for herself. And I think there's a huge gaping hole in our society of how do we actually help women who are facing this situation. But I don't believe that poverty necessitates killing a human being. Because when you're, and I know, sorry, you can't, the mic's, or I moved away. Okay. And I'll give you kind of like an analogy that I've talked to people about before of when if you're living in poverty, so when my grandma, she had 4 children. Well, so she had 3 children, and then she became pregnant unexpectedly with my uncle. And they were living in poverty. There was no husband in the situation. She was the only income earner for her family. It would it have been okay for her to kill like my dad or my aunt? Well, no one would ever advocate that because those human beings had already been born. They were going to school. They were 5, 2, 7. But the argument often we hear is, well, she should be able to kill the unborn child. When actually, it'd be actually better if you're going to talk about saving money to kill the older child, because the older child is consuming food, is being very expensive with taekwondo lessons and swimming lessons and all that stuff.
So I guess I'm wondering, why isn't that your life's passion?
Oh, sure. No.
To support like low
sure.
income poverty.
And we do that. But I believe I'm called to this mission. I don't believe. I think all of us, like, that's why I give to charity. That's why I volunteer. But I also believe we also have to fundamentally eradicate abortion in our nation. So I don't think it's a valid.
There's more children.
Well, no, actually, that's my next book is going to be what does a pro-life movement need to do? Because I actually feel that our pro-life movement we don't have enough resources in our country to actually take care of women when abortion's made illegal. I think it's a huge problem because you're not going to find resources at Planned Parenthood. They don't have resources for women who choose life. So where do we go?
For this cause can be used for low-income children.
Well, why don't you do that, and I'll do this, or we'll switch positions.
Oh, I'll do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming out to talk to us tonight. So as many people know, Flint, Michigan has been without clean water for several years now. And the rate of miscarriage there is actually 58% higher than the national average. So my question for you is, do those lives matter?
Absolutely.
And what about
why would you think that would say those lives don't matter? What would I say today? Say, oh no, those lives don't matter. Of course those lives matter.
Okay, so there's people in Flint, Michigan who've been literally drinking poisoned water for like multiple years now.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, I'm not convinced. Like, if we're gonna talk about like violence, then I'm not sure if the issue is quite as simple as you're making it out to be, because I think that many types of violence exist in our world. And I mean, I'm not sitting here saying like I'm pro-abortion. Like, I don't think it's like great that like people feel like they have to like do this, but I think that like at the end of the day, women exist to be here, and they exist to be more than just like vessels for like another life. And so it's really hard for me to get on board with this idea that if I was literally raped on this campus, that it's my moral obligation to put my whole life on hold and to carry my perpetrator's child and bring that person into existence rather than pursuing my own personal goals and putting my own personal body first, when that I'm a fucking human too, like.
So is the child inside of you.
Okay, but like.
What is your question?
My question is, if through no fault of my own, I have become pregnant, right? And like you're saying like these lives matter. Okay, how? I don't understand how you're saying that like. The life of an unborn, whatever you want to call it, fetus, the life of an unborn fetus, person, whatever, is somehow more important than my life when I haven't even made the decision to be become a mother, and I'm literally carrying the child of a perpetrator of violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple of things there. I think that one, the child is half biologically yours. It's not just a perpetrator's child. It's actually half your child. And you didn't choose to become a mother. You didn't choose to become a mother. And I understand that's one of the moral crimes that rapist would have committed, in forcing you to become a mother. But I do think that child has human rights. And I think that's one of the fundamental tragedies of abortion, is that it's pitted women against children. It said, well, whose rights matter more? I don't want to become a vessel just for this human being. What about her rights? What about her human rights? And we don't say in the pro-life movement that the preborn child's rights are greater than the mother's. We say that they're equal. We believe in equality. Next question.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Earlier you mentioned that you pray outside of abortion providers' offices, and you also cited some religious figures' arguments against abortion at other points.
I did? Who did I cite?
I don't recall.
Catholic Students for Life.
No. That was with Francis Kiesling, Catholics for Choice.
Right, so Catholics.
A pro-abortion Catholic source. I didn't recite any pro-life religious leader.
I was just wondering why you felt the need to invoke religion in discussions about abortion.
Okay, did you pre-write this question 2 hours ago thinking of what I'm going to say?
I wrote it because I wanted to remember it 5 seconds ago.
Yeah. I didn't actually bring up religion. I didn't bring up religion in my presentation. The only time I brought up religion was when I said Francis Kiesling was president of Catholics for Choice, because she's a recognized pro-abortion leader, but I did not bring up religion.
You did say that you prayed outside.
Okay, that's a life testimony. I wasn't quoting pro-life religious leaders or talking about using religion. I never used religion to justify why I believe abortion kills a living human being.
I just was wondering why you felt the need to invoke religion at all in any shape or form in discussions about abortion with many people.
Okay, fine. I wasn't praying in front of an abortion facility. I was standing there having positive thoughts.
The non-establishment clause of the First Amendment to the Constitution prohibits the government from...
That's the dumbest question. Move on to somebody who actually listened to my speech, please.
How is that fair? Answer the question.
I answered this question. Good luck. I'm sorry. She's trying to figure out where to go to.
Hey, ma'am.
We're using the mic.
You're using the mic. Go ahead.
You mentioned that it's hard to have discussions around abortion development and young matches. And seeing that, I think a lot of students are genuinely interested in your thought processes behind this and are asking real questions. And it seems like you're yelling at people.
Because I have someone who is saying that I said something that I didn't say. I said I pray in front of abortion facilities. I wasn't invoking religious doctrine.
I'm just wondering how you tend tactically, really, how are we supposed to have conversations about these things when you are a leader in this movement and we're trying to engage in a discussion on it.
Sure.
I'm actually curious.
Yeah. And I've been answering your questions. I've been answering your questions about rape and do lives in Flip, Michigan matter. I have been answering those questions. But I do get irritated when people have pre-written questions about something that I didn't use a religious justification or theology to justify why I feel abortion kills a unique, whole, living human being.
Hi. So I feel like in a lot of your arguments you made the sort of dichotomy of pro-choice and pro-life being that pro-life is caring about the women themselves, and if they were to decide to carry their babies for the full term, that you're going to be there to support them and stuff like that. And in the anecdote you're using about having baby changers on college campuses and stuff, I guess I'm just curious, why you think pro-choice isn't doing that?
Because they don't. We actually host events and forums that are pregnancy resource forums on campuses, and the pro-choice groups on campus won't even show up to discuss those things. Why isn't that the student chapters of Planned Parenthood, of Vox, of the student chapters of Feminist Majority are actually changing the campuses and meeting with the administration? We're the ones when a girl is told, oh, you can't receive financial aid because you missed you missed your finals last semester. We're the one who goes and sits with her and talks with the dean of students and writes those letters and enforces Title IX.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming and for inspiring such spirited debate and possibly inspiring us to open our minds. So I just wanted to ask you, what policy aims does the pro-life movement hope for, particularly from our president and from Congress, as to sort of support life?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the election of Donald Trump was extremely controversial, but especially in the movement, in the pro-life movement. The pro-life generation is not a monolithic generation. We're pretty diverse. Our staff is religious, non-religious, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, and so are the students that actually lead Students for Life groups. And some of our students didn't vote for Donald Trump. Others of us did, and it was mainly an anti-Hillary Clinton vote. But what allowed me to vote for the president was that there were 4 promises made in writing that he agreed to do. 1, appoint pro-life Supreme Court justices that will uphold the Constitution, that will vote to overturn Roe and Doe, that he would sign a law terminating Planned Parenthood's government contracts, their federal funding, that he would sign a law that bans abortions after 20 weeks when scientifically children feel pain, and that he would enforce the Hyde Amendment and codified Hyde, making sure taxpayer dollars can't be used abortions, except in cases of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. That's actually because I went back and forth all year about whether I would vote for him, and those are the 4 things. So that's actually what legislatively we're trying to do in Washington, D.C. The 20-week ban is in the Senate. We will get Democrats on record voting against banning abortions at the moment children can feel pain, and we will win seats because of that. We will, hopefully, if the Republicans get their act together, defund Planned Parenthood. So that's kind of what we're working towards legislatively. Other questions right there?
Thanks for coming. You talked a lot about misrepresentation in the pro-choice movement, and I just wanted to ask, I do feel as though there were some points that you brought up, is that, like, for example, when you said that woman only has 3 choices and one was to dismember a child, when in reality that's typically not the way that abortion actually happens, especially in the first weeks. And also regarding contraception's carcinogen, actually contraceptions often decrease certain types of cancer.
Certain types, but increase others.
Exactly. And I wonder why you choose to only represent one side of that.
Well, I think it's because I'm representing a side that you never hear from, right? 90% of Americans, if you would ask them, is contraception moral, would say yeah. And you actually never hear a discussion of the actual risks of contraception. When you even talk about the risks of hormonal contraception, it causes people to freak out because it's very personal. I think that's my point today, and I wanted to represent another side and have an actual honest discussion about contraception, things that you won't hear about, things you won't hear talked about. And again, when I'm talking about contraception, I'm talking about artificial hormonal contraception, not barrier methods contraception. That's a different argument. Question there. Thank you.
Hi. So one of the lies that you claim feminists tell is that reproductive rights are necessary for equality in the workplace. You yourself are incredibly privileged to have, as you said, a stay-at-home husband, to help out with childcare, and to work in a job where bringing children along is appropriate. Many other women are not similarly privileged. So how then can you argue that access to reproductive rights is not necessary to
Sure. No, I mean, this is where I go back to that societal laziness that Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton allowed, because we actually haven't had this conversation. So I was at the White House 4 weeks ago, and I met with Ivanka Trump's chief of staff, whatever. Ivanka is heading up the Office of Economic Development. Now, I don't really know what qualifies her to head that up, but her main initiative is women in the workplace, single mothers particularly. And we actually met, and we were talking about our Pregnant on Campus initiative of how can we help single moms achieve equality in the workplace. One thing that Republicans will be introducing at the beginning of the next year in Congress is going to be a national maternity and paternity leave policy. That way employers, even if they're small businesses and they may not be able to afford to give someone 12 weeks maternity leave, that there will be a national fund in place to help support her so she can, as we know, children thrive when they bond with their parents, especially those first through 3 years. So I actually think there is a problem. The state of Arizona, we were champion the state of Arizona. They passed a law, a mandate within their own bureaucracy that allows all of their employees to bring their children to work up to 6 months of age. We do the same thing at Students for Life, and obviously when they're old enough to sit, we let people do that. I think there needs to be honest discussions that are had beyond just going to that abortion facility. And I think that's one of the problems that Roe and Doe have created in our society. When in KCV Planned Parenthood in 1994, the Supreme Court tells women that we have to have abortion to be equal to men in the workplace. I reject that. I don't need to kill my child in order to be equal in the workplace. Question?
No, next question.
I would like to I have to go to Boston tonight, so I need to move on quickly.
Well, actually, it's two questions. One is more personal, and then one is based on statistics. But I'd also like to add, earlier you were mentioning that in previous talks with given events in college, we were wondering where Planned Parenthood was. Well, we're all members
Sure.
of Planned Parenthood.
I saw your pink shirts.
So we are here and active on campus. So my first question is, the Guttmacher Institute released a study done from years 2010 to 2014 that indicated a statistically insignificant difference in abortion rates between countries where it's illegal and where it's illegal. And so that implies that for various reasons, women will seek out abortion, whether or not it's legal. And when it is an unregulated procedure, the health risks are drastically worse.
That's actually not true. In Chile, which banned abortion, and right now I think they just voted to ban abortion. Well, she's got multiple questions, and I'm tired, so I need to answer. But what I'm saying is what you're saying isn't true, because in Chile, where abortion is illegal, their mortality rate of pregnant women is actually lower than the United States. The United States has one of the highest risks of maternal mortality, and abortion is legal in all 9 months. But keep continuing on.
Well, this study is addressing the global average, not between developed and undeveloped countries. This just has to do where the distinguishing factor being whether or not it's legal or illegal. And so my first question is, what would you do to address unregulated abortion procedures if you also want to restrict access to contraceptive measures by defunding organizations like Planned Parenthood? And then the more personal question is, I knew someone who had a planned pregnancy of twins, and one of the twins died in a complication. And so if the mother had carried the pregnancy to term, which she really wanted to do, the other twin would have died at birth, and her health would have been seriously implicated. Like, what would you say in that situation? Those are my questions.
All right, so for your first question, you're trying to ask me what?
So abortion.
How to help decrease maternal mortality rates?
Unregulated abortion procedures. If statistics indicate that making abortion illegal does not affect the rate of abortion.
That's actually not true. So in the United States, Bernard Nathanson, the co-founder of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, spoke publicly about how when they were creating their campaign to legalize abortion in America, that they falsified the statistics about how many women were dying from illegal abortions in our country. They came up with the number 10,000 women. When in fact, you look at Mary Calderon, the medical director of Planned Parenthood in 1960, who came out and publicly said that the majority of abortions were being committed in America at that time when it was illegal by physicians in good standing, and that the abortion death rate, the abortion complication rate, had dramatically increased since the 1940s, and it was about 500 women a year because of the invention of penicillin. Next.
The second question.
The second question is, what would I tell a woman? And the thing is, I'm hearing this from your friend, from you, so I wasn't privy to her medical document, so it's really hard to like say, oh, this should happen, this shouldn't have happened. But you're talking about she was pregnant with twins, one twin died in utero, and so are you saying she had to have an abortion because delivering the other twin was going to kill her? Is that what you were trying to say?
The other twin would definitely have died, and she would have been subject to serious medical risk.
Sure.
So I'm, in a case where she can physically carry out the pregnancy to term, but the child will die anyway.
Sure.
If she could abort the pregnancy and avoid months of physical and emotional trauma, shouldn't that be her choice to do so? Doesn't that seem like a very bad
What physical and emotional trauma are you referring to?
Like
what emotional trauma?
Your baby for 8-7 months, knowing that it's going to die immediately after birth. That seems very emotional and traumatic.
So it's easier to go ahead and abort a late-term baby on Sunday and carry a dead baby in your uterus for 3 days before you deliver him? That's what happens in late-term abortion. I mean, that's the argument. So you're saying that you hear that all the time. So that's what happens in late-term abortion. You induce cardiac arrest on a Sunday, and then the child dies in the womb later that day, and she carries a dead baby in her, and then she delivers a child. When you're talking about a case of a poor prognosis for the child, right? That's what you're asking about, a child who has some sort of disability or some challenge. Well, she actually has two things. She actually has two cases. She's talking about the life of the mother, and she's also talking about a poor fetal diagnosis. So when you're talking about the life of the mother, I think you talk about the physician's intent. When you go in, so there's women all the time that are 20 weeks plus that it becomes very clear that carrying that child to term may be life-threatening for the mother. You talk about the physician intent in that situation. Is that physician trying to save and trying to treat two patients, or is he trying to destroy a living entity? And so I have friends who are OBs that have had to actually face real life circumstances like this. And the challenge that they have, and morally how they discuss it, is what is their intent? Their intent is to save both lives. It's to prolong both lives. It's to get her to a point where she can carry that child as long as possible and then deliver that child whole. Not go in with forceps and crush that child. You deliver that child whole, and you put that child in the NICU. You have the best NICU folks there. You give that child every chance of living. That's when you're talking about. When you're talking about those life-threatening cases, it's always after those 20-week periods. And so the physicians who have those cases, that's how they address that. When you're talking about a poor prenatal diagnosis, I would say, I don't see how it helps her to say, well, my child will likely die after I give birth, so therefore I should pay somebody to just kill my child. That doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? What if someone's going to suffer in their life? There are certain individuals in this room who will suffer greatly in their life. It does not justify killing them now and me paying someone to kill my child because he or she will suffer greatly in the next 5 to 15 years. Next question.
Hi. I want to start off by saying I come from a family that shares a lot of similar views as you in terms of being pro-life. So I can empathize with that. But what concerns me a little more is what the reality of anti-abortion and especially anti-contraception legislation would look like. And at the beginning, I remember you saying, I don't want to misquote you, but something like you don't think that your argument would create more inequality between men and women. And so for those of us who don't want to start a family as students at Dartmouth, do you advocate abstinence as the only option? And what would that look like in terms of reality, especially on a college campus?
Well, I think you have to understand the science of what happens when two individuals have sex.
I'm sorry, I think we understand that.
You can actually create... No, actually you don't. Because if you don't understand, if you're two heterosexuals engaging in sex, you have to understand that it's a procreative act that was intended to procreate. It was intended to procreate. So if you're not willing to potentially accept that consequence of becoming pregnant, then maybe having sex isn't the best option for you.
So my question is, in terms of inequality between men and women on campus, do you think that the consequence would fall mainly on the shoulders of the woman?
Absolutely, and that's why I think that this is why we talk about feminism. This is why we have our Pregnant on Campus program. Because how is it that a man can just say, here's $350, go get it taken care of, and she's the one left holding the bag? This is why when you engage in a procreative act, when two heterosexuals engage in a procreative act that could result in a unique, whole, living human life being created, they're both morally responsible for that life of that child. And I think abortion has created a society that has told men to sit down and shut up, that you don't actually have a say in this, and by the way, you're not responsible for this. And it's left women having to hold everything together. This question.
Last question right here.
Hi, thank you very much for coming tonight. This has been enlightening time for all of us.
Yeah, I found out I'm a racist, actually, so that was interesting.
Abortion is the killing of a unique human, and so, okay, so it's whole, you say whole often. So I'm just wondering, because, as you said, a zygote there's potential for human life there,
A zygote is human life.
Okay, so I'm just wondering what your stance on male masturbation is, because carries the potential for human life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
oh yeah, this happened to me in high school all the time.
Okay.
So pro-choice people in high school were like, oh, Kristan, you must be against masturbation. I don't want to think about it, it's whatever. A sperm, right, is a part. A sperm is a part of a man's body. An egg is part of a woman's body. When sperm and egg unite, they create a unique, living, whole human being that's never existed before and never existed again. A sperm is a part that can be used to create a whole living human being. But it's not full DNA. It's not a human person. Science tells us that sperm and eggs aren't persons. But a zygote, an embryo, a fetus, is a human being, is a person that's never existed before and will never exist ever again. That has unique genetic code. It's parts versus whole.
Yeah, because Islamophobic too. You said, oh, 2 steps back and all this kind of shit. I'm from the Middle East, but you support these administrations that bomb us. If you're pro-life, you're against all war.
Actually, many pro-lifers are against all war. Actually, many pro-lifers.
You support these regimes. You work for Bush and Cheney.
Yeah.
They killed millions of kids in Iraq, in Syria, in Iran.
Now that's a speech I can give on just war. And the question is, was Iraq a just war? And that's a question for another time. But I absolutely do support a lot of our foreign policy. So, are we finished? Why what?
You've elected a president who is sexually assaulting women.
And I said, well, do you want to start talking about Bill Clinton? Because we can talk about Bill Clinton all day long. We can talk about Bill Clinton.